About 14 years ago, I set off on a 13-month round-the-world trip. One of my first stops was Kilkenny, Ireland. I caught a bus from town and arrived at Falscrath Castle, built in the late 1300s. In 2004, it was a hostel that only cost €14 a night per bed. I had never spent the night in a castle before, much less for €14. I set my things on a bed and went outside to socialize with other tourists in the late afternoon. There were a couple of guys on the roof, and they yelled at us to join them for the sunset. I loved sunsets, so I started up the stone steps. First, a circular staircase, and then a very narrow last flight of stairs up to the roof. While I was climbing, I heard someone behind me, but when I got to the top of the stairs and turned around, there was no one. I found this a bit odd, but enjoyed the sunset anyway. After dinner time, the guests all cook in the kitchen, and then dine by candlelight. The castle caretaker then told us the story that the castle was haunted. One ghost makes the air feel cold, another female ghost smells like flowers, and the last ghost runs up and down the stairs. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Was I followed by a ghost? I didn't sleep much that night in the creepy old bunk bed. Unfortunately, a few years later the caretaker resigned, and Falscrath Castle closed its doors to backpackers in 2009. It's privately owned today. I stayed in a little B&B once, but it was a basement room. I had to be in by 10:30 p.m, as the tenants were a little off, and I went down early and said goodnight to the couple. As I reached the bottom step, I heard a click of a key in a lock. I went back up the stairs and checked the door. Yup, it was locked tight. I knocked quietly and softly, but no one replied, though I could hear movement and what sounded briefly like laughter. I then phoned the B&B in the hope that someone would answer me. And someone did. An answering machine. I felt so stupid and hung up. My prison for the night was a very basic and small room, with a sink, a cot, and a portable heater, from a place that time forgot, and lots of frames on the walls, but oddly no pictures. I went to bed, but not before I put a small obstacle course between my single corner bed and the steps. You can imagine the horror I felt sleeping there. I honestly felt like I was going to be butchered in the middle of the night. In the morning when I woke, the door was slightly ajar. I dressed and went up for breakfast, a little annoyed and profoundly creeped out. I felt like the trust had been violated, and that maybe my rights had been infringed. The food was already ready, so I ate it, and as no one was around, went to pay. The landlady was very nonchalant, and still a bit odd, and when I mentioned the door locking, without looking up she said it was house rules and no one had complained before. She claimed it was for safety, as I might be a serial killer, or worse. What's worse? I tactfully asked what would happen if a fire broke out, and she said there were people for that, presuming she meant firemen who'd rescue me. On a full tummy, and on my way out, I realized I had to take up the issue online and left a review. At the time I didn't freak out, but thinking about it, much later, I really worried about being locked in a basement without any way out, just a sealed door with a key, controlled by a couple of oddballs. Maybe they were harmless, but if that door hadn't opened in the morning, or the ancient heater caught fire, who knows? My girlfriend and I live in the Detroit area. We had tickets to the show and decided to book a hotel downtown for the night. Once we finished the show and our night on the town, we went to bed at our hotel. We woke up at around 10 a.m. next morning and headed down for breakfast, which I thought ended at 10:30. On our way down, we passed the cleaning lady for our floor, and I asked her for checkout time and if it was okay if it were past 11 a.m. when we left. She was super nice and told us not to sweat it. She then asked our room number, and naively, I told it to her. When we get downstairs, breakfast had ended at 10, so we turned right back around to go back to our room. Once we reached the door of our room, the cleaning lady came flying out of it and scared us as we were trying to get in. Turned out, she heard us coming and we interrupted her from stealing my girlfriend's money. Her purse was open with the wallet pulled out. She also had her work laptop and phone in the room. If it had played out any differently time-wise, it would have been a much shittier day. My girlfriend didn't lose anything, other than a bit of faith in humanity. Fortunately, she has a lot of that. I was in Greece and stayed in a hotel that had a hole in the floor, covered with a piece of board that wasn't secure. When I moved the board to see what was going on, there was dirt underneath it. Later, I was getting dressed and had the television on just for background noise. There was a staticky channel that kept going out, but I kept it on. It was obviously a Middle Eastern channel, and there was a man who was blindfolded. He had on a white shirt untucked, some pants on, and was missing a tooth on the top of his mouth. He was a little agape, and seemingly in shock. There were men in khaki military uniforms around him. And then they clapped as someone put what looked like a pack of cigarettes into his shirt pocket, and they walked away. There were wires connected to the pack of cigarettes that were long and went out to the side of the TV shot, so I'm not really sure how long they were, but after a few moments of me watching this guy with the cigarettes in his pocket, he was suddenly gone in a poof. I had just witnessed an execution. That was some pretty disturbing deep web stuff right there. I'm not sure why or how it was on the TV. It was pretty disturbing. I went into shock afterwards and switched off the TV straight away. I'm not really sure why or how it happened, but all that I know is that I never want to witness anything like that again. I stayed in a Motel 6 in Marina, California. I wasn't expecting 5-star accommodation, because hey, it's a Motel 6, right? Other than being a little noisy, we slept okay. The next morning, I started packing my stuff. I'm a lung cancer survivor and need special breathing equipment, CPAP, that helps me breathe at night. I unplugged my unit and went to disassemble it to be packed away. When I opened it up, it was chock full of roaches. Instead of breathing clean filtered air, I had been breathing in air filtered through roach leg hair. They were even in the tubing mask. I cannot even begin to describe how the horror of lifting that lid and seeing those little bastards scurry out of the deep into the inner workings of my equipment. Of course, they were in our bedsheets too, and our luggage. We emptied every single article from our luggage, killed the roaches as they were hiding in the liner, and then carefully shook everything out and repacked. The CPAP unit was bagged tightly, because I knew there were roaches inside and I didn't want to bring them home. I complained to the manager, who assured me that there were no roaches in the room. She was simultaneously sympathetic and unhelpful as hell. After 3 months of back and forth with Motel 6 corporate offices in Texas, I was refunded for the 2 nights I had stayed there, which is doubtably horrifying when I realized I had been sucking on roach fumes for not 1 but 2 nights. It gets worse though. My medical equipment was ruined. Phone calls to various repair shops around the country got the same result. We can't or we won't fix it. We don't even want it in the building for fear that our inventory will be infested. Insurance wouldn't pay to replace it, because hey, they bought the first one, so tough shit, right? As a result, I was out of pocket for several $100s to replace vital equipment that kept me alive at night, because Motel 6 couldn't keep their premises clean. It would end up costing me nearly $900 for a 2-night stay in a crappy roach motel. For that kind of money, I could have stayed at the Cypress Hotel in Carmel and had money left over for dinner. Moral of the story, it isn't always best to travel on a budget, especially in Motel 6. Be wary. Hygiene is very important. When I was in year 10, all of the GCSE history students went on a school trip to Belgium to look at World War I battlefields and stuff. On the first leg of the trip, we all stayed in a fairly budget chain hotel. But on the second, we stayed in this independent place in the center of whatever town we were staying in. We all got up to the lobby, and it looked like a pretty standard hotel. The decor was a little bit dated, but it seemed clean and stuff. They even had a fancy dining room, and electronic fobs in place of keys. Our history teacher was handing out a fob to each of the group, as we were staying in rooms with 4 people. And then, when he got to my group, he handed us an honest-to-God old-fashioned key. "Looks like you guys have the creepy room," he said, with a banterous gleam in his eye. And those few words managed to convince the 4 of us, included one very shy and sheltered, young for her age girl who got anxious at everything, that we were about to be the stars of the Belgian version of The Shining. The second creepy thing about this room, following the key situation, was that it was situated on the very top floor of the hotel. And it was in fact the only room on this floor, and was situated 2 flights of stairs above everyone else. The third creepy thing was that it was not actually a room at all, but a suite with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, all situated along a narrow corridor, and it was very poorly lit. The fourth creepy thing is that one of us actually ended up being reduced to tears of anxiety, and that was in the room that we could all access, as there were a number of locked doors on the other side of the hall. On the first night, we heard voices behind one of them. They sounded angry. We were confused. This was the only room up here. We weren't sure where the door led to, but we knew that we didn't want to find out. Now, the creepy sounds of the people talking I could put up with, but my other friend found it extremely challenging to do so. She was in the bed next to me and was having a very rough time sleeping. At some point in the middle of the night, I found her standing over my bed, tugging at my bed sheets. She called out to me and wanted me to go with her because she couldn't sleep until she knew for sure that no one else was in our room. I was a bit groggy, and, in truth, quite reluctant to get up, as I was fine as I hadn't heard anything. But, hearing the desperate tones in my friend's plea, I staggered out of bed in my pajamas and decided to help her look around, but not before asking what exactly the problem was and what she had been hearing. Sure, we heard the voices too before we went to sleep, but we thought that perhaps, just on the off chance, that door could lead to some other stairwell, and we were just hearing faint sounds that were being echoed via that passageway. As far-fetched as that may have sounded, it certainly gave me enough comfort to manage to sleep. But she insisted that it wasn't that, as those sounds had faded a while ago, but instead been replaced with the sound of walking. As I mentioned before, this room was old, so creaky floors were an undoubted part of the experience. She insisted that she heard the creaks walking to and fro, as if someone was pacing occasionally down this long corridor. I didn't believe it for a second, but part of me, thinking that if that locked door did lead to some kind of other staircase, that perhaps someone was coming up and perving on the girls. I wasn't too convinced of the theory myself, but it was making my blood boil just thinking about it. So, up we got, our two friends still asleep, and started to look around. We first looked under the beds, to find nothing, and we crept into the dark hallway. We fumbled and managed to find the light switch, careful for it not to wake up our friends, and started looking around. As I mentioned before, the hallway was extremely thin, and there were no places to hide at all. There was nothing there, it was just a hallway. But as we kept looking in the other spaces and the other rooms, there was still nothing. We were dumbfounded, and my friend said if we could just sit on her bed together for a few minutes, just to see if we heard the noise. I agreed, knowing full well that it was very likely that I would close my eyes whilst on her bed and pass out, and that undoubtedly she'd have to go to my bed because I would be out like a rock. To those of you wondering if I cared that my friend had occupied the bed for a few hours, I was exhausted, and at that point couldn't give two shits where my head fell. As we were listening for what seemed like ages, as I said before, I was undoubtedly drifting off. My friend, wide-eyed, was paying the utmost attention, but no sounds could be heard. As always, it was during one of the moments where I swore I was about to pass out that we heard a very distinct creak in the hallway. Now, just to be clear, there was absolutely no one else around. We thought for a moment that it could have been one of our friends in the other room. So, we quickly go and look out and search the place again. There's no one. She says that there must be someone behind the door, and that they must have sneaked in and then quickly closed the door behind them. But I insist that it would be very unlikely, as doors are naturally quite loud, and the improbability of them being able to creak, go back in, close and lock the door, which by the way used the same old style key that we had, would have been next to none. So there we were, creeped out of our minds. At this point, I was becoming more and more freaked out, as everything was starting to piece together better in my head. At first I thought it was just my friend, but now I was starting to believe her. I was growing fearful myself of what the hell was going on here. After turning on most of the lights and looking around the place again and confirming that neither of us could find anyone and that no one was here. We both sat on her bed again, until of course we both passed out from exhaustion, being unable to find anyone. That morning, over breakfast we were speaking to the other girls in our room, and asked them how they slept. They said they slept fine, and asked the same question to us, although it was self-evident from our puffy eyes that we hadn't had the best night. But it didn't matter. We were still chipper about being in Belgium and enjoying our time away. It wasn't until that evening, when we had to return to those blasted dormitories. It wasn't until the late evening, when we remembered that we would have to spend one more night in that room, did we start to panic. We went back up into our room, and when I arrived, I noticed that something was wrong. I always put my pajamas under my pillow after I sleep, and I did the bed. That is how I'd left my room. We'd put the do not disturb sign on the doors, because one of our friends had this very annoying thing. She always thought that everyone was trying to steal her stuff, so she flat out refused to let housekeeping in to do any of their job. It wasn't really a problem in this occasion, because we'd only used the bedsheets once, but even so, my pajamas were on the floor by the bed. I found this extremely odd. It hadn't happened to any other of my friends, and nothing else seemed amiss. Not to mention, obviously housekeeping hadn't come in, not only because of the door sign, but most of all because nothing had been changed in the slightest. That night, I was trying to watch something on my iPad with my scared friend, who kept jumping at any noise she heard, which was, of course, our other friends. She fell asleep, and then I crawled my way back into my bed. I'm not gonna lie, I was quite afraid, and the fact that it was pitch black amplified the darkness. You know how it is. You start thinking that there are things out there when obviously there aren't, and it just amplifies your fear tenfold. So there I am, pulling the blankets over my eyes, trying to fall asleep. And I do, but at some point during the night, I twist feeling cold. Trying to search for my blanket, I open my eyes and see that it's on the floor. Now, it wasn't on the floor like it had just fallen or I'd kicked it off, but it was as if it had been pulled and placed neatly at the very end of the bed. I was absolutely bricking it at this point, and I don't mean metaphorically, I mean literally. The fear had caused everything to suddenly want to release, so I ran to the bathroom, and there as I was doing my business, because the bathroom door wasn't all that good, and I was there just doing my business as quickly as I could, scared out of my mind, when I heard something strange. It sounded like a scratch. Just so that you're aware for the layout, the bathroom was adjacent to that door that we didn't know what was behind. I heard scratching. I wasn't really sure what it was. Was it a key? Was it a cat? Or was it something else? I quickly finished and flushed, and the sound seemed to go away. I made my way back into bed, and tried listening as intently as possible. Fortunately for me, that was the last I heard, and just as I was drifting off trying to pay attention to each and every sound, other than the snoring of the girl next to me, I heard it. A creak, and then another creak. There was someone in the room. I lanced out of bed, darted for the open door, and looked straight out into the hallway, only to be met by a fat lot of nothing. I was profoundly creeped out, and went to bed, said prayers which I hadn't said in absolutely ages, and passed out after what felt like hours. I'm gonna be honest, I was glad that my friend had fallen asleep when we were watching a film on my iPad, because I don't think I would have been able to stand her being awake with me. When I woke up in the morning, I was exhausted, even more so because we had to leave even earlier to make our way back to England. Just before I left, I was doing some final checks of my luggage to make sure I had everything. I was taking all my things out the bathroom when curiosity struck. When we arrived, we tried opening that door that was locked, and of course it was locked, but something inside me was niggling, and I needed to know. I went and I approached that door. I put my hand down to the handle and pulled, and it swinged open. Where I thought there were stairs, there was nothing but a little cupboard that was absolutely empty. I was profoundly freaked out by that. I had no rational explanation for what I heard. Big, heavy creaks in the middle of the night. The door now being suddenly unlocked. It was too much for me, and I was so glad to be out of that place. I never told my friend what happened to me the night after, because I didn't want to frighten her, and didn't want to bring it up anymore because she was a fraidy cat in general, and I really didn't want any of this escalating beyond me. All that I have to say is that I'm glad we didn't stay another night in that hotel in Belgium. If we would have had to, I swear, I would have asked one of my teachers to swap with me, because there's no way I could have gone through that again. I went to Birmingham one night and stayed in a cheap £55 a night room that had no windows. At about 2 a.m, I woke up to someone knocking on my door claiming to be hotel staff. I stayed silent in bed as they said, "Excuse me, are you okay? We heard you screaming and wanted to check on you." I ignored them and went back to sleep. At 5 a.m, the same guy, and this time a lady, started banging on my door telling me to open up, as I phoned them for help. I didn't. I stayed in bed. When I got up in the morning to check out, I inquired at the desk about why they had tried knocking on my door. It was 2 men at the desk, and they said that they had been on duty all night, and no one had sent anyone to my room during the night. I will never stay at that hotel again. I was staying in a little hotel in Brisbane, Arizona. It is practically a ghost town. The hotel had a pretty grand entryway with a marble staircase, and there is a chip in the staircase that they claim came from Pancho Villa, riding his horse through the hotel back in the day. Anyway, one night while I was there, I woke up very early at about 4 a.m, and for some reason, I heard the faint sound of a piano, so decided to investigate, because I didn't remember a piano in the lobby of this place. I went downstairs to the lobby and couldn't hear anyone, so I wandered back up the stairs to my floor and followed the sound down a dark hallway, and it got louder as I got closer to the end. So I knew I was on the right track. At the end of the hallway, there was a door that I put up to my ear, and I could hear the piano coming from behind the door. It wouldn't have been that creepy had the door not been padlocked shut. I am a 22-year-old female from Greymouth, New Zealand. I consider myself quite well travelled. Once I left my boring old town back home, I decided to travel the world, get jobs here and there, and see and do as much as I could, given the visas that I could get, of course. There is one occasion where I found myself absolutely horrified, when I was staying in a small hotel in Spain. Now, I didn't speak Spanish at the time, but most people at the hotel fortunately spoke English, much to my delight. Now, it was my first time in Spain, and I had decided to go stay in the south, as that's where the good weather allegedly was. I was staying in this small hotel in Malaga. I can't remember the name for the life of me, as it has been a few years now. But on to the story. After arriving there, I was a bit disappointed. Even though I had booked budget, and for one, I wasn't expecting what I got. It was pretty shoddy to say the least. But then again, for €30 a night, who was I to complain? The room itself was simply ordinary. I had a decent-sized bed, a working shower, and pretty much everything I would need for my week-long stay. However, there was one thing that was really bugging me. My reading light on the lamp next to my bed was faulty. It worked half the time, but it would turn off, and you'd have to jiggle around the lamp bulb itself in order to get it to work. I'm not really sure how. I assumed the bulb was fine, but it was loose wiring within the lamp. For the first few days, I let it slide. Now, I don't know about other girls, but I have a habit. I tend to roll my dirty used underwear and socks into a kind of ball, and keep them in a bag. That way, when I get back home, I can do a big wash and everything is quite organized. I know it sounds very specific, but it is what I do. So after 3 days, that's what I had been doing. When I get home that evening and go to put away my used clothes and underwear for the day, and to put on fresh ones after my shower, I noticed that I only had one little bundle, and that 2 of them were missing. I found this odd. Where the hell did my underwear go? I was putting them in my bag, so didn't really know why they'd been moved. Had I done it? I started looking around the small room, and found nothing. At first, I contemplated a few possibilities. Perhaps when they came in to clean the room, maybe they cleaned it for me and would give it back? Or perhaps they thought it was rubbish and threw it away. Either way, I wasn't overly concerned, so I left it at that. The very next day though, when I get back to my room, all the little bundles of underwear and socks are gone. This time I'm starting to feel quite creeped out. I'm unsure why or what's going on here. I wanted to call the front desk to ask, but I felt really embarrassed asking if someone's taken my underwear to try and clean it. So I decide to drop it. The next day, I come back, but this time I'd left my underwear in a different place to see if it would still be gone. And it was. At this point, I was becoming disgusted, and knew that something was up here. But at that time, I didn't have the balls to do anything about it. I was getting very concerned, and didn't know what to do. I felt violated. Why was someone taking my things? My underwear, my dirty used underwear. It made me sick. So there I was, completely lost and alone, and repulsed beyond belief. I tried thinking of a plan. What could I do to try and catch this person? I didn't really know what to do. I only had a few days left, until I had to make my way back up north to Galicia, where I was teaching English to Spanish students, and where my temporary apartment was for the next few months. So, I was a bit lost. I couldn't exactly stay in the room and spy and wait to see what happened, hiding in the wardrobe, because that would be counterproductive, and against my interest of being able to explore a place I'd been so desperate to see for ages. So I decided to drop it. That same evening though, just when I went to turn on the reading light, the lamp didn't work. This pissed me off big time. Not only had my clothes been stolen, and I feel like I was being violated, but now the goddamn lamp wouldn't turn on, so I couldn't read my book from bed? Well, at least I had the balls for this. I marched down to the front desk and asked the what appeared to be 14-year-old boy why exactly my lamp wasn't working. Bless him, I don't think he had anything to do with it. But in his broken English, I managed to explain that my lamp was broken. So he took me to the storage room. When I got down there, the boy looked to be about 14 years old. He wasn't really sure what I was saying, and I was trying to say it in English. I tried saying it in Spanish by adding an O on the end of lamp, lampo, which apparently didn't mean anything, and was getting very frustrated by this. So he resorted to taking me into their little utility closet, where they kept all the toilet paper, light bulbs and such, in a hope that he would be able to assist me. When we got there, it was fairly big, slightly bigger than I expected for the cupboard, and I was looking around and pointed to a light bulb, but still made the shape of a lamp. He still wasn't understanding me. But in a moment of genius, I think he finally understood what I was saying, and brought me round past some shelves where they kept the bigger stuff. It was there that the lamps were. But at that moment, something inside me dropped like a stone. Bundled in a small corner in the darkness of that cupboard was my underwear. Not my socks, just my panties. Someone, I don't know who, had taken the liberty to undo my disgusting little filth balls, get my underwear, and throw them into the corner of this little tiny room. Now, that grossed me out and creeped me out profoundly. Part of me wanted to demand a refund there and then and leave this goddamn place. But being a realist, I knew it unlikely that I'd be able to find a hotel at this time of the evening, let alone have all the struggle of going around searching for one. So I decided to play it cool. I knew where my stuff was, and I tried pointing to it and asked why someone had taken my stuff. The guy looked down and went red in the face, but I could see in his eyes that it wasn't him. I knew that he only worked very late in the evenings. So he and I were both confused. There was no way I was picking up my underwear now, and I left it there, completely disgusted. When I got back to the room with a new lamp and light bulb, I tried to think of what I could possibly do, but couldn't actually decide anything. I went to bed a lot later than usual, and woke up later and went down for breakfast. When I went back up to the lobby, I had a chat with the lady working there, and asked to go to the storage cupboard, that there was something of mine that had been taken, and I wanted to show her in order to get it back. She didn't really know what I was talking about, so together we went, and obviously it was gone. I was quite freaked out, and at least this woman spoke English, and I managed to explain to her that my panties had been taken consecutively and dumped in that room. Not only that, but they'd been extracted from the little sock ball. I was incredibly grossed out and furious. The lady obviously understood my anger and was very angry as well. She said that the person responsible would obviously have a lot to answer for and potentially be fired pending a review. With her on my side, I asked her what time she'd be leaving in order for me to probably speak to her either today or tomorrow at worst. We agreed that we would chat again tomorrow, as she left quite early during the day, and said that she would be doing inspections to all cleaning staff to check that they weren't taking things they weren't supposed to. As I was making my way back into my room, I noticed that the door was ajar, and as I went in, there was a woman of about 30 years old, quite tanned, looking through my bag. I snapped, and I asked what the hell she was doing. She obviously hadn't noticed me come into the room, and I actually saw her slightly jump into the air in fright. Obviously she didn't speak English, but she could understand from my tone of voice that I was incredibly pissed off. With my limited Spanish, I kept on saying malo, malo, meaning bad, bad. She was extremely frightened and ran out of the room. When I went to see if she was taking my passport or something, there it was, my fresh little bundle, out of my bag, on the floor. It was now obvious to me that she had been doing it. I don't even want to think about what sick purposes she had for collecting all my underwear, but I was incredibly grossed out. Of course, I went back to front desk, told the lady there, and described the one who I had literally just caught going through my things. I managed to sleep peacefully that night. But when I spoke to the lady at the front desk the next day, she said that she had been fired, and of course that she was very much grossed out by her actions. I felt glad that something had happened, but it still didn't stop me from feeling completely violated, and honestly was expecting some sort of compensation from the hotel. But when I tried asking the lady, she said that I had used their facilities, and even though that had gone on, that there was nothing she could do. Slightly disappointed and more angry than before, I had to accept my fate and left the very next day. But that isn't where the story ends. So, after being in Spain, I moved around Europe for a bit and met up with a guy who I got to know really well, and we ended up starting a pretty good solid relationship together. He was from Australia, and both of us were going to have to go back home around about the same time. As he was going home before me, he told me that he wanted to go to Spain. Me, having lived there for a few months, could testify that it was a beautiful place, and he said he really wanted to see Malaga. I started to tingle at that point. I really didn't want to go back, but I really liked this guy, so I agreed. When we were looking through hotels, as it was very last minute, a lot of them were becoming very expensive as their occupancies were quite full. Lo and behold, still one of the cheapest hotels in the area was the one I had previously stayed at. I had told him what happened when I went there, but his charm and charisma won me over, insisting that the lady was fired and that the experience I had was all because of the woman. But this woman was now gone, but that I should be fine and everything would be okay. I was charmed by his words, and much against my gut instinct, the booking was made. When we got there, the first 2 or 3 days went swimmingly. There were new staff, I didn't actually recognize anyone from last time, and was feeling pretty good. All the bad feelings had pretty much disappeared. But we were in town and we needed to go back and get something from the hotel. So together we went. And just as we were walking through a corridor to get to our room, we saw a little housekeeping trolley. Okay, whatever. We had to squeeze past it as the corridors were fairly narrow. and the door to the room that someone was cleaning was left wide open. Inquisitively, although I'm sure most people do it, as I was scooting past, I briefly glanced into the room, and there I saw the same woman who had stolen my underwear. She was doing a bed and didn't notice me, but that was the last straw. It then clicked that the woman had lied to me. She hadn't fired her. She probably just told her not to come in whilst I was away, and that really pissed me off. I didn't say anything until we got to the room, and then told my boyfriend. He, being much stronger than me, just said that we should find somewhere else and leave, which is exactly what we did. We left them a piss-poor review as well, and I am never going back there. A word of warning to all you ladies. There are definitely creepers out there, and you never know who they are or what they look like. Boy or girl, they exist. I'm gonna be honest, I was quite surprised it was a woman. But there you have it. While attending college, I went on a road trip with a good friend of mine to watch a sports team in a big game being played in Florida. We were hurtling down the Florida Turnpike at 80 miles an hour at 2 in the morning. I had a CB radio in my truck at the time and turned it to channel 19. When out of the darkness, a voice from the radio said, in the creepiest way possible, "I didn't know you Tennessee boys could read a map." We responded with some nervous laughter. Turns out, it was a trucker that saw us pass him and noticed our TN license plate. He was super helpful and told us there wasn't much around, but that there was a motel that we could try up the road. We thanked him and headed that way. Getting off the exit and following his directions brought us to a motel that, I kid you not, looked exactly like the one from the movie Psycho. We went into the office, but there were no lights on, and it appeared to be empty. A quick walk down the handful of rooms yielded no more lights, people, or other cars, or any signs of life in general. We went back into the office, just to see if we had missed a sign or something, and I said very loudly, "Hello?" At that moment, a young guy that had been asleep on a cot behind the front desk got up and asked what we needed. We said we wanted a room, and he responded, "Pick whichever you want. They're all unlocked." We ended up picking one. All it had was 2 queen beds. They appeared reasonably clean as far as motels go, but it was creepily outdated. The bathrooms were completely covered in old tile that was brownish green, and for some reason reminded me of an old high school gym locker room. We took turns showering and tried to get a bit of rest, which ended up in us laying down on top of the comforters on the bed, since that seemed like the most hygienic thing we could do. We napped on and off for about an hour. Realizing that we weren't going to get any rest, we went back to speak to the guy in the office. After waking him up and telling him that after our showers we would rather just head back out, we asked how much we owed him. "Dunno," he responded. "How about $10? We paid the man and left. It was the weirdest lodging experience I've ever experienced, and honestly, that place was darn right creepy. We had such a bad feeling the whole time that we thought getting out of there would be the best thing to do.